The light turned red and the most dangerous man in the city forgot how to breathe. His ex was in the crosswalk, rain-soaked, carrying twins that looked exactly like him. And in that second, he realized someone had stolen 2 years of his life. But before he could reach her, someone else decided she had to disappear, so what did Loris Parisi do next? If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. Loris Parisi adjusted the platinum watch on his wrist as his armored black Mercedes S-Class cut through the rain-slicked streets of the city. A second vehicle followed close behind his security, always present, always silent. The glow of streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, casting shifting shadows across the polished interior. Beside him sat Diane Simpson, 32, blonde hair styled in soft waves that framed her sharp features, emerald earrings glinting beneath the dim cabin light. She wore a form-fitting green dress that spoke of expensive taste and careful presentation. She was everything his world rewarded, beautiful, composed, and deeply embedded in the machinery of his empire. At 37, Loris had built his life on control. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his beard meticulously groomed, his navy suit tailored to perfection. Emotions were weaknesses he couldn't afford. Loyalty was currency. Power was survival. His relationship with Diane had lasted 8 months, long enough to satisfy appearances, short enough to avoid expecting anything real. No vulnerability. No complications. Just 2 people occupying the same space without disrupting the order. Giovanni said the expansion into the docks is almost finalized, Diane said, scrolling through her phone with manicured fingers. We should celebrate this weekend, somewhere visible. Loris said nothing. His dark eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, his jaw tight, his mind already calculating tomorrow's moves. The rain hammered against the windshield in steady rhythm, the traffic light turned red. The crosswalk filled with evening pedestrians, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that the man watching them from behind bulletproof glass had built an empire on fear and loyalty. Loris observed them distantly, his thoughts elsewhere, when something made his chest tighten. A woman was crossing the street. She moved slowly, carefully, her body bent slightly forward against the weight of 2 infants strapped to her chest in a beige fabric sling. The twins were crying softly, their small faces red and scrunched. Rain streaked down her olive green jacket, soaking into her shoulders. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a loose, damp ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her exhausted eyes. She looked worn, struggling, alone, and achingly familiar. Loris stopped breathing. Stephanie Jackson, the only woman he'd ever let close. The one he'd walked away from without explanation, convinced it was the only way to keep her safe from his world. That had been over 2 years ago. He'd buried the memory of her smile, her voice, the way she used to look at him like he was more than what he'd become. But now she was here, right in front of him. And she wasn't alone. The twins. Loris's gaze locked onto the babies bundled against her chest. The timing crashed through his mind like a freight train. 2 years since he'd left her. The age of the children. The unmistakable shape of their small faces. His hands tightened on his knees, knuckles whitening. They were his. He knew it instantly, the way a man knows his own reflection. The resemblance wasn't subtle, it was undeniable. The line of their tiny jaws, the shape of their eyes, even through their tears. His blood, his children. While he'd been building his empire, living in luxury, making decisions that shaped the underworld, she'd been carrying his children. Raising them. Alone. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Beside him, Diane's eyes shifted from her phone to the windshield. She followed Loris's gaze with the precision of someone who'd learned to read every micro-expression, every shift in his body language. Her emerald eyes tracked the woman in the crosswalk, studying her with cool, clinical calculation. Stephanie reached the opposite curb, adjusting the sling carefully, protecting the babies from the rain with her own body. She didn't look toward the Mercedes, didn't see him. She simply continued forward, disappearing into the evening crowd, swallowed by the city. The light turned green. The car behind them honked impatiently, but Loris Parisi didn't move. His hand remained frozen on the gear shift, his eyes still locked on the spot where Stephanie had vanished. Loris? Diane's voice was soft, measured. The light's green. He didn't respond. Couldn't. His mind was racing through every possibility, every implication. Stephanie had been pregnant. She'd tried to reach him, he was certain of it now. She wouldn't have just disappeared. Not her, not without trying. Which meant someone had made sure he never knew. Loris. Diane's hand touched his arm lightly. "Are you all right?" The touch broke the spell. Loris blinked once, his expression smoothing into the mask he wore so well. He pressed the accelerator, the Mercedes gliding forward with barely a whisper of sound. "I'm fine," he said, his voice flat, controlled. But he wasn't fine. Everything he'd built his life on: control, order, calculated distance, had just shattered in the space of a red light. The woman he'd abandoned to protect was struggling to survive. His children were crying in the rain, while he sat in luxury with a woman who meant nothing. Diane studied him for another moment, her expression unreadable, before returning her attention to her phone. But Loris could feel the shift in her posture, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her breathing had changed ever so slightly. She'd seen his reaction, and she was already calculating what it meant. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Rain continued to hammer the windshield. The city lights blurred past. Loris's mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of Stephanie crossing that street, exhausted and alone, protecting their children with nothing but a thin jacket and sheer will. He'd spent 2 years believing he'd done the right thing by leaving. That walking away had kept her safe from his world, from the violence and danger that followed him like a shadow. He'd convinced himself that she'd moved on, found someone better, lived the normal life she deserved. He'd been wrong about everything. When they arrived at his penthouse, Diane moved to follow him inside, but Loris stopped her at the entrance. "Not tonight," he said quietly. Diane's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Is everything? I need to be alone." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something in his expression. Then she nodded slowly, her smile perfectly composed. "Of course. Call me tomorrow." Loris watched her walk to the elevator, watched the doors close, watched the numbers descend. Then he turned and walked into his apartment, closing the door behind him. The space was immaculate, expensive, empty. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the rain-soaked city below, and made a decision. He was going to find out everything: where Stephanie lived, how she'd survived, why he'd never known about the twins, and when he found out who had kept them from him. The thought remained unfinished, but the promise was absolute. Loris Parisi had spent a lifetime burying his past. But tonight, it had looked him in the eyes, and he wasn't letting it disappear again. Stephanie Jackson pushed through the door of her third-floor walk-up apartment, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The twins had finally stopped crying during the last block, their small bodies going limp with sleep against her chest. She moved carefully, each step deliberate, terrified of waking them before she could set them down. The apartment was small, a studio with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked but barely produced heat. The furniture was secondhand: a worn couch, a table with uneven legs, a crib she'd found at a thrift store and scrubbed until her hands were raw. But it was clean, safe, hers. She lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, her back screaming in protest. Slowly, carefully, she unwrapped the sling and transferred first Oliver, then Emma, into the crib beside her bed. They stirred but didn't wake, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Stephanie stood there for a long moment, watching them sleep. Oliver had Loris's nose, Emma had his eyes. Every day, she saw him in their faces, and every day, it broke her heart all over again. She sank onto the couch, pulling off her wet jacket with shaking hands. Her body ached everywhere, her shoulders, her back, her feet. She'd been on them for 12 hours, working double shifts at the diner just to make rent. The tips had been decent tonight, maybe decent enough to cover the electric bill, maybe. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from her neighbor, Mrs. Linda, the elderly woman who sometimes watched the twins when Stephanie had no other choice. "They were angels today. Left some soup in your fridge. Eat something." Stephanie's eyes burned. She typed back a thank you, her fingers clumsy with fatigue, then set the phone down and pressed her palms against her face. She was so tired, not just physically, tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. Tired of struggling, tired of being alone, tired of looking at her children and seeing the ghost of a man who'd vanished without explanation. 2 years ago, the memory came unbidden, as it always did in her quietest moments. She'd met Loris at a gallery opening she'd been catering. He'd been standing apart from the crowd, dark and intense, watching everything with those calculating eyes. When he'd spoken to her, his voice had been low, careful, like he was unused to casual conversation. They'd talked for hours that night, about art, about the city, about nothing and everything. He'd walked her home, asked if he could see her again. She'd said yes without hesitation. For 6 months, Stephanie had lived in a world she didn't fully understand. Loris never told her what he did. But she wasn't naive. The security, the late-night calls, the way people looked at him with a mixture of fear and respect. She knew he was dangerous. But with her, he'd been different. Gentle, present, real. She'd fallen in love with him completely. Then, one morning, he was gone. No explanation, no goodbye. Just silence where his voice had been. Stephanie had called, left messages, shown up at places she thought he might be. But it was like he'd never existed. Like she'd imagined the entire thing. 3 weeks later, she'd taken the pregnancy test. She'd tried to reach him then with desperate urgency. She'd written letters, sent emails, even tried to find someone who knew him. She'd begged for just one conversation, one chance to tell him about the babies growing inside her. Nothing. Every attempt met with silence. Eventually, she'd stopped trying. She'd told herself he'd made his choice, that whatever they'd had meant nothing to him, that she and the babies were better off without a man who could disappear so completely. But late at night, when the twins were asleep and the apartment was quiet, she still wondered why. What had she done? What had changed? Had he ever felt anything real for her at all? Stephanie stood slowly and walked to the small kitchen. Mrs. Linda's soup was still warm in a container. She heated it on the stove, her hands moving on autopilot, and ate standing up, staring at nothing. She'd built a life from wreckage. Found this apartment, worked 3 jobs until the twins were born, then found childcare she could almost afford. She'd learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep, learned to stretch every dollar, learned to be both mother and father to 2 children who deserved so much more than she could give them. And she'd done it without asking anyone for help, without using Loris's name or power, even though she knew somewhere in the back of her mind that he could solve every problem she faced with a single phone call. She'd chosen pride over safety, dignity over comfort. Some days, she regretted that choice. Days when Emma had a fever and she couldn't afford the doctor. Days when Oliver cried from hunger and her paycheck was still 2 days away. Days when she looked at her reflection and barely recognized the exhausted woman staring back. But she'd never regretted her children. They were everything. The only good thing that had come from loving a man who'd left her behind. A soft cry came from the crib. Emma, stirring in her sleep. Stephanie set down her soup and moved to the crib, placing her hand gently on Emma's tiny chest, humming softly until the baby settled again. She didn't know that less than 5 miles away, Loris Parisi was standing at his window, searching databases for her address. She didn't know that he'd seen her tonight, crossing that street with their children. She didn't know that the silence she'd interpreted as abandonment had been carefully constructed by someone else. She didn't know that the man she'd loved, the man she still loved, if she was honest with herself, had never received a single one of her messages. All Stephanie knew was that tomorrow, she'd wake up at 5, feed the twins, drop them with Mrs. Linda, work a double shift, come home exhausted, do it all again, because survival wasn't a choice. It was the only option she had. She looked down at Oliver and Emma, their small faces peaceful in sleep, and whispered the same promise she made every night. I'll keep you safe. No matter what, I promise. Outside, the rain continued to fall. And somewhere in the city, the man who'd fathered her children was coming to find her. But Stephanie Jackson had no idea her carefully constructed world was about to shatter, again. Diane Simpson stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her downtown apartment, a glass of wine in her hand, her reflection sharp against the darkness outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening like broken glass beneath the streetlights. Her phone sat on the marble counter behind her, silent. Loris hadn't called. That wasn't unusual. He often needed space, needed time to think through whatever calculations were running through his mind. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something had shifted in that car, and Diane had felt the ground beneath her carefully constructed world begin to crack. She took a slow sip of wine, her mind replaying the moment at the red light, the way Loris had frozen, the way his entire body had gone rigid. His breathing had changed, his focus had narrowed to a single point. She'd followed his gaze and seen her exhausted woman in a cheap jacket, struggling with 2 crying babies in the rain. Unremarkable, ordinary, forgettable. Except Loris hadn't forgotten her. Diane had seen that look before, years ago, when she'd first started working in Loris's inner circle. Back then, he'd still carried a photograph in his wallet. He'd thought no one knew about it, but Diane noticed everything. It was her greatest skill, seeing what others tried to hide. The woman in that photograph had been younger, smiling, auburn hair catching sunlight, the same woman who'd crossed the street tonight, transformed by exhaustion and hardship, but unmistakably her, Stephanie Jackson. Diane set her wine glass down with controlled precision and walked to her laptop. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up files she'd buried 2 years ago. Files she'd told herself she'd never need to access again, but she'd kept them, just in case. The screen filled with information. Stephanie Jackson, 29, former art gallery assistant, now working as a server at a downtown diner. Current address, a walk-up apartment in a neighborhood Diane wouldn't be caught dead in. No criminal record. No social media presence. No connections to Loris's world. Almost invisible. Exactly as Diane had intended. She scrolled further, her jaw tightening as she read the details she'd collected during those frantic months 2 years ago. Stephanie's pregnancy. Her attempts to reach Loris. The dozens of calls, emails, even a handwritten letter delivered to one of his business fronts. Diane had intercepted every single one. It hadn't been difficult. She'd had access to Loris's communications, had been trusted to filter what needed his attention and what didn't. And Stephanie's desperate messages, those definitely didn't need his attention. Diane had told herself she was protecting him. Loris had just ended the relationship cleanly, finally, the way he ended everything that threatened his focus. He'd been building something important, consolidating power, eliminating threats. He didn't need some lovesick girl pulling him backward into sentiment and weakness. That's what Diane had told herself. But the truth she'd never spoken aloud, was simpler and far more selfish. She wanted him for herself. She'd been in love with Loris Parisi since the day she'd started working for him. Loved his intelligence, his control, his absolute command of everything around him. She'd watched him from a distance for months, studying him, learning him, positioning herself as indispensable. And when he'd ended things with Stephanie, Diane had seen her opportunity. She'd made sure Stephanie's messages never reached him. Made sure every attempt at contact vanished into silence. She'd even paid off a receptionist to turn Stephanie away when she'd shown up in person, desperate and 3 months pregnant. Then Diane had stepped into the empty space at Loris's side, patient, careful, never demanding, never emotional, just present. Exactly what his world required. It had worked perfectly, until tonight. Diane's hands trembled slightly as she closed the laptop. She pressed them flat against the cool marble counter, forcing her breathing to steady. Those babies changed everything. Loris was calculating, controlled, emotionless about most things. But children? His children? That was different. That would crack through every wall he'd built. She'd seen it in his face tonight, the recognition, the realization, the immediate shift from cold detachment to something she'd never seen in him before, purpose. Diane had spent 8 months building a relationship with a man who treated her like a pleasant accessory, who took her to dinners and functions, who slept beside her but never really let her in. She'd accepted it because she believed, eventually, she could make him love her. That time and proximity would transform obligation into something real, but in one moment, at one red light, she'd seen the truth. Loris Parisi was capable of love, deep, consuming, world-shattering love. He just didn't love her. He loved the woman struggling in the rain. The woman Diane had erased, and now he knew about his children. Diane picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over Loris's contact. She could call him, pretend ignorance, ask about dinner tomorrow, maintain the illusion of normalcy. But she knew Loris. He was already investigating, already pulling information. By morning, he'd know where Stephanie lived, what she did, every detail of her life. And then what? Would he discard Diane like she'd never mattered? Replace her with the woman he'd actually wanted all along? The woman who'd given him children? No. Diane set the phone down and walked to her bedroom, opening the closet with deliberate calm. In the back, behind designer dresses and expensive shoes, was a locked box. She retrieved it and sat on the edge of her bed, opening it with a small key she kept on her keychain. Inside were business cards, contacts she'd made over the years working in Loris's world, people who operated in the shadows, people who could solve problems that couldn't be handled through conventional means. One card in particular caught her eye. She'd received it 6 months ago from a representative of the Kovalenko Syndicate, a rival organization that had been trying to find weaknesses in Loris's empire for years. They'd approached her at a charity gala, subtle and careful, offering her a way out if she ever needed it. She'd kept the card, told herself it was just insurance. Diane stared at the embossed number, her heart pounding. This was insane, dangerous. If Loris ever found out, she'd contacted his enemies. But what choice did she have? If Stephanie disappeared, if something happened that made reconciliation impossible, Loris would have no choice but to move forward, to accept what couldn't be changed, to stay with Diane because the alternative was gone. It would be tragic, unfortunate, but final, and Diane would be there to comfort him through his loss. Her hands shook as she picked up her personal phone, not the one Loris had access to, but the burner she kept for private matters. She dialed the number on the card, her breath shallow. It rang 3 times before a voice answered. Yes? I have information, Diane said softly, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. About Loris Parisi. About a vulnerability. There was a pause. Then, we're listening. Diane closed her eyes and spoke the words that would set everything in motion. He has children, twins, and the woman raising them has no protection. Loris Parisi hadn't slept. He sat in his home office. The city sprawled beneath him through the windows, dawn breaking over the skyline in shades of gold and gray. His desk was covered with files, photographs, documents, every piece of information his people had gathered through the night. And there, in the center of it all, was the truth he'd been denying for hours. The twins were his. Oliver Elijah Jackson, Emma Rose Jackson, born February 14th, 2 years ago. No father listed on the birth certificates. Mother, Stephanie Marie Jackson. Loris stared at the hospital records, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The dates aligned perfectly. 6 months with Stephanie, then he'd walked away in early May. The twins had been born the following February. 9 months. He picked up one of the surveillance photos his security team had taken in the early morning hours. Stephanie leaving her apartment building with the twins, heading to the neighbor's door. Even in the grainy pre-dawn light, the exhaustion was visible in her posture, the way she moved carefully, protectively. While he'd been sleeping in silk sheets, she'd been working double shifts. While he'd been building his empire, she'd been raising his children alone. While he'd been sitting in that car with Diane, Stephanie had been crossing the street in the rain with babies crying against her chest. His babies. Loris's hand curled into a fist on the desk. He'd told himself leaving her had been the right choice, that his world was too dangerous, too violent, too consuming for someone like Stephanie, that she deserved normal, safe, a life without looking over her shoulder. But she'd been pregnant, and she'd tried to reach him. He was certain of it now. Stephanie wasn't the type to simply vanish. She would have tried to tell him, would have fought to make contact, which meant someone had stopped her. His mind went immediately to the protocols in place around his communications, the people who had access, the filters designed to protect him from distractions and threats. Diane, the realization settled over him like ice water. Diane had been his assistant back then, before she'd become more. She'd handled his messages, screened his calls, managed his schedule. She'd been efficient, loyal, indispensable. She'd also been in love with him. He'd known it even then, but had told himself it didn't matter. That she was professional enough to separate her feelings from her work. He'd been wrong. Loris stood abruptly, walking to the window. His reflection stared back at him, a man who'd built his power on information and control, now realizing he'd been blind to the manipulation happening right beside him. How many messages had Diane buried? How many times had Stephanie called while he was in meetings, only to be told he was unavailable? How many attempts had been erased before they ever reached him? His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. Romano. Confirmed. Subject's work schedule attached. 2 locations. Diner and late-night cleaning service. No security, no protection. Vulnerable. Loris's jaw tightened further. Stephanie was working herself to exhaustion in dangerous neighborhoods, carrying his children through the city without protection, completely exposed. Because of him, because he'd left, because he'd been too arrogant to verify she was safe, too trusting of the people around him. Another text came through, this one from Diane. Good morning. Breakfast later? We should talk about last night. Loris stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. Part of him wanted to confront her immediately, demand answers, make her admit what she'd done. But that would be impulsive, emotional, and emotions in his world got people killed. He needed to be smart, strategic. He typed back, busy today, tomorrow. Her response came quickly. Of course, miss you. Loris set the phone down, disgust twisting in his chest. Every touch, every conversation, every moment with Diane had been built on a foundation of lies. She hadn't just kept information from him, she'd actively destroyed his chance to know his children were being born. She'd stolen 2 years from him. His phone rang. Romano, talk to me, Loris answered. The woman leaves for work in 30 minutes, takes the twins to a neighbor, walks 4 blocks to the bus stop. Completely exposed, no awareness of surveillance. She doesn't know she needs to be aware, Loris said quietly. Want us to approach? Offer protection? No, Loris's mind was already calculating. Not yet. I need to understand the full situation first. But keep eyes on her. Close range. If anyone looks at her wrong, you intervene. Understood? Understood, boss. Loris ended the call and returned to his desk. He pulled up another file, Diane's communications records from 2 years ago. He'd need his tech specialist to dig deeper, but even the surface-level data showed gaps. Deleted emails, call logs that didn't quite align, evidence of manipulation. He should have seen it. Should have questioned why Stephanie never tried to reach him after their relationship ended. Should have trusted his instincts instead of accepting the convenient narrative that she'd simply moved on. But he'd been so focused on consolidating power, eliminating threats, building something unshakable. He'd told himself that cutting emotional attachments was necessary, strategic. Now he understood the cost of that strategy. Loris picked up another photograph, this one showing Stephanie with the twins at a small playground. She was smiling, pushing Oliver on a swing while Emma laughed in a stroller. It was the first time he'd seen her smile in any of the surveillance photos. She looked like the woman he'd fallen in love with. Before he'd broken her, before he'd left her to struggle alone, his children deserved better than what they had. They deserved safety, security, a future without struggle. And Stephanie deserved the truth. Deserved to know he hadn't abandoned her by choice. Deserved to know someone had made that choice for him. But first, he needed to secure their safety. Because if Diane had been willing to manipulate him, to erase Stephanie from his life, what else was she capable of? Loris pulled out a secure phone and dialed a number he rarely used. It rang twice before a woman answered. "I need background on someone," he said. "Deep background. Financial records, communications, associations. Everything. Name? Diane Simpson." There was a brief pause. "Your girlfriend?" "Not anymore," Loris said coldly. "And I need it by tonight." He ended the call and stood, straightening his suit jacket. He had meetings to attend, business to conduct, an empire to run, but for the first time in years, none of it mattered as much as the woman and children 4 miles away. His family, Loris Parisi, had built his life on control. Now he was going to take it back, and anyone who'd stood between him and his children was going to learn what happened when you stole from a man who had nothing left to lose. Stephanie wiped down the last table in the diner's corner booth, her lower back screaming in protest. The lunch rush had been brutal, a packed house of business people on tight schedules, all demanding fast service and leaving mediocre tips. Her feet throbbed in her worn sneakers, and she still had 4 hours left on her shift. "Table 6 needs refills," called Marcus, the other server, rushing past with plates balanced on both arms. Stephanie nodded, grabbing the coffee pot and forcing her legs to move. Smile, pour. Ask if they need anything else. Move to the next table. Repeat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Through the diner's wide windows, she could see the city moving past people in expensive suits, clutching designer bags, living lives that felt impossibly distant from hers. She didn't let herself think about it. Thinking led to wanting, and wanting led to the kind of pain she couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A text from Mrs. Linda. "Emma has a slight fever. Nothing serious, but thought you should know. Gave her some infant acetaminophen. She's sleeping now." Stephanie's heart clenched. She quickly typed back, "Thank you. I'll check on her as soon as my shift ends." She couldn't leave early, couldn't afford to lose the hours. The electric bill was due in 3 days, and she was still short. Emma's fever was probably just teething. She'd had them before, but the worry gnawed at Stephanie anyway. What if it wasn't just teething? What if it was something worse? What if Emma needed a doctor and Stephanie couldn't afford it? "Stephanie, order up!" The cook's voice cut through her spiral. She shoved the phone back in her pocket and grabbed the plates, delivering them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The customers barely glanced at her. To them, she was invisible, just another server in a cheap uniform, forgettable and replaceable. Sometimes she wondered if that's what she'd become. Not Stephanie Jackson, the woman who'd once dreamed of opening her own gallery, who'd loved art and possibility, and the man with dark eyes who'd made her believe in magic. Just a tired body moving through motions, surviving one shift at a time. The afternoon crawled past. By 3 o'clock, her hands were shaking from exhaustion and skipped meals. She grabbed a piece of toast from the kitchen, day-old, but free, and ate it standing by the dishwasher, washing it down with water. "You look like hell," said Rita, the head waitress, lighting a cigarette by the back door. "Thanks," Stephanie said dryly. "When's the last time you had a full night's sleep?" Stephanie couldn't remember. "I'm fine," Rita exhaled smoke, studying her with knowing eyes. "You've been saying that for 2 years, honey. You're gonna burn out. Can't afford to burn out. Can't afford to collapse either." Rita crushed out her cigarette. "You got anyone helping you? Family?" Stephanie shook her head. Her parents had passed away years ago in a car accident. She had a cousin in Oregon they hadn't spoken in 5 years. No siblings, no safety net. Just her and the twins against the world. The father? Rita asked carefully. Stephanie's jaw tightened. Not in the picture. His choice or yours? Does it matter? Rita was quiet for a moment. I guess not. But those babies deserve better than watching their mama work herself to death. Stephanie knew that. God, she knew that. Every time she looked at Oliver and Emma, she saw everything they deserved and everything she couldn't give them. Nice clothes instead of thrift store hand-me-downs. A real home instead of a cramped studio. A mother who had energy to play instead of collapsing the moment she walked through the door. Security, stability, a future. But wanting didn't change reality. So Stephanie did what she always did, pushed the thoughts down and kept moving. Her shift finally ended at 7. She changed out of her uniform in the tiny bathroom, pulling on jeans and her olive jacket, the same one from last night. It still smelled like rain. The bus ride home took 30 minutes. Stephanie sat by the window, watching the city blur past, and tried not to think about the cleaning shift she had starting at 10, 4 hours at an office building downtown, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans while the twins slept at Mrs. Linda's. She'd be home by 3 in the morning, sleep for 2 hours, wake up with the twins, start again. This was her life now. This was survival. When she reached her building, she climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, her legs heavy. Mrs. Linda's door opened before she could knock. She's better, the elderly woman said immediately, seeing the worry on Stephanie's face. Fever broke an hour ago. Both of them are sleeping. Relief crashed over Stephanie so hard she almost cried. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd manage. You always do. Mrs. Linda squeezed her hand. But you don't have to do it alone, you know. It's okay to ask for help. Stephanie nodded, even though they both knew she wouldn't. Asking for help meant admitting she was failing, meant acknowledging she couldn't do this alone, and if she admitted that, she'd have to face all the other truths she'd been avoiding. She carried the twins back to her apartment, one at a time, setting them gently in their crib. Emma stirred slightly but didn't wake, her face flushed but cool. Oliver slept with his tiny fist curled near his mouth. Stephanie stood there, watching them breathe, and felt the familiar ache in her chest. They looked like him. Every day, they looked more like Loris. Oliver had his nose, the shape of his jaw. Emma had his eyes dark and intense even at 2 years old. Sometimes, in her weakest moments, Stephanie imagined what would happen if she reached out again. If she found a way past whatever wall had kept him from her and told him about his children. Would he care? Would he want them? Or would he look at her the way that stranger had the first time she'd shown up at his office with pity and dismissal, like she was just another problem to be handled? She couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk her children being rejected by the man whose blood ran through their veins. Better they never know him than know he didn't want them. Stephanie changed into her cleaning uniform, moving quietly so she wouldn't wake the twins. She had 20 minutes before she needed to leave for her night shift. She made herself a cup of instant coffee, staring at nothing, when something made her glance toward the window. A black SUV was parked across the street. She'd noticed it yesterday too, in a different spot. Probably nothing. Coincidence, but a chill ran down her spine anyway. Stephanie pulled the curtain closed and told herself she was being paranoid. She had no idea that the man in that vehicle was there to protect her, or that the danger heading her way had been set in motion by someone who'd smiled to her face. Diane Simpson sat in a private booth at an upscale restaurant downtown, her fingers wrapped around a martini glass. Across from her sat a man in an expensive charcoal suit, tall, blonde, with cold blue eyes that assessed everything like a predator calculating odds. Alexei Kovalenko, second in command of the Kovalenko syndicate, Loris's most dangerous rival. You're taking a significant risk meeting me here, Alexei said, his accent slight but distinct. If Parisi finds out... He won't, Diane interrupted smoothly. Loris thinks I'm at a charity board meeting. He doesn't track my every movement. He should. Alexei smiled without warmth. Given present circumstances... Diane took a slow sip of her drink, maintaining her composure even as her pulse raced. This was insane. She knew it, but she'd come too far to turn back now. I told you about the woman and the children, she said quietly. What more do you need? Alexei leaned back, studying her. Context. Why does Parisi care about some nobody and her twins? He's not known for sentimentality. They're his children, Diane said, each word tasting like poison. He didn't know about them until 2 nights ago. Now he's been running surveillance, gathering information. It's only a matter of time before he makes direct contact. And this threatens you how? Diane's jaw tightened. It changes everything. Loris doesn't have weaknesses. He's built his entire empire on emotional detachment. But children, his children, that's different. That breaks through everything he's constructed. Ah, Alexei's smile widened. You're afraid he'll choose them over you. I'm not afraid, Diane lied. I'm being practical. Loris with a ready-made family becomes unpredictable, sentimental, vulnerable. That's bad for business. Bad for everyone in his organization. Including you. Including everyone, Diane insisted. The woman Stephanie Jackson, she's a liability. She has no security awareness, no understanding of Loris's world. She's been raising those children in poverty, completely exposed. Anyone could use her to get to him. Anyone like us, Alexei said pointedly. Diane met his gaze. Yes, there was a long silence. Across the restaurant, a pianist played something soft and forgettable. Diane forced herself to breathe normally, to show no fear. What exactly are you proposing? Alexei asked finally. The woman is vulnerable. She works 2 jobs, leaves the children with an elderly neighbor, walks through bad neighborhoods alone. If something were to happen, if she disappeared, it would be tragic, but it would eliminate the complication. You want us to kill her. I want the problem solved, Diane said carefully. How you solve it is your business. Alexei laughed a sharp, dangerous sound. And you think Parisi would just accept this? That he wouldn't burn the entire city down looking for whoever took his children's mother? He'd grieve. He'd investigate. But without the woman, there's no emotional center. The children are too young to remember her. Eventually, Loris would move forward. He always does. And I'd be there to help him through it. The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. But Diane had committed now. Had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. You're colder than I expected, Alexei said, something almost like respect in his voice. Most people who love someone can't stomach this level of calculation. I'm a realist, Diane said, and I'm offering you an opportunity. Remove Stephanie Jackson, and you remove Loris's greatest weakness before he can protect it. You'll have leverage, information, a way to destabilize the most powerful man in the city. Alexei was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. I'll need details, he said. Her schedule, her routes, the neighbor's routine, everything. Diane's heart hammered. This was it. The point of no return. She pulled a flash drive from her purse and slid it across the table. It's all there. Her work schedule, home address, the times she's most vulnerable. The twins' routine. Alexei took the drive, examining it briefly before pocketing it. And if this goes wrong, if Parisi traces it back to you, he won't, Diane said with more confidence than she felt. I've been careful. There's no connection between us, no communication trail. This meeting never happened. For your sake, I hope you're right. Alexei stood, buttoning his suit jacket. We'll handle this within the week. After that, you never contact us again. Understood? Diane nodded, her throat tight. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the restaurant's evening crowd, and felt the full weight of what she'd just done settle over her. She'd just ordered the death of an innocent woman, a mother, someone whose only crime was loving the same man Diane loved and having his children. Her hands trembled as she reached for her martini glass. She drained it in one long swallow, the alcohol burning down her throat. This was necessary, she told herself. Stephanie was a complication, a threat to everything Diane had built. Loris would be hurt, yes, but he'd survive. He always survived. And eventually, he'd come back to Diane because she'd be the only constant in his shattered world. That's what she told herself. But beneath the justifications and rationalizations, a small voice whispered the truth she didn't want to acknowledge. She was destroying an innocent woman out of jealousy and fear. And if Loris ever found out when he found out, there would be no forgiveness. Diane paid her bill and left the restaurant, stepping out into the cool evening air. Her phone buzzed. A text from Loris. Change of plans. Need to see you tonight. My place. 8 p.m. Her blood ran cold. Did he know? Had he found something? No. Impossible. She'd been too careful. Diane typed back. Of course. See you then. She had 2 hours to compose herself. 2 hours to become the woman Loris expected, calm, supportive, unshakable. 2 hours to bury what she'd just done so deep that nothing could unearth it. Across the city, in a small studio apartment, Stephanie Jackson tucked her twins into their crib. Completely unaware that she'd just been marked for death, she kissed Oliver's forehead, then Emma's, and whispered the same promise she made every night. I'll keep you safe, no matter what. But some promises, no matter how fierce, can't stop what's already been set in motion. And as Stephanie left for her night shift, the wheels were already turning. The Kovalenko syndicate was mobilizing. Diane was preparing her performance, and Loris Parisi was about to discover that the woman he'd trusted had betrayed him in the worst possible way. The city held its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would shatter. Loris Parisi stood in his penthouse, staring at the document on his desk. His tech specialist had delivered it 2 hours ago, a complete digital forensic report on Diane Simpson's communications from the past 2 years. Every deleted email, every blocked call, every intercepted message. All of it from Stephanie. The evidence was irrefutable. Diane had systematically erased every attempt Stephanie had made to reach him. Phone calls marked as spam. Emails redirected to a hidden folder and deleted. Even a handwritten letter that had been signed for at his office but never reached his desk. Stephanie had tried. God, she'd tried so hard. And Diane had made sure he never knew. Loris's jaw clenched as he read through the timestamps. Messages sent in desperation. Voicemails left at 3 a.m, Stephanie's voice breaking as she begged him to call her back, to just talk to her for 5 minutes. Loris, please. I need to tell you something important. Please just call me back. It's been 3 weeks. I don't understand what happened. Did I do something wrong? Please just talk to me. I'm pregnant, Loris, I'm pregnant. Please, I need you to know. Please call me. That last message had been left 4 months before the twins were born. 4 months when he could have been there. Could have protected her. Could have made sure she had everything she needed. Instead, Diane had deleted it within an hour of receipt. Loris's hands curled into fists on the desk. The rage that filled him was cold, controlled, absolute. This wasn't the hot anger of impulse. This was the calculated fury of a man who'd been betrayed by someone he'd trusted with access to his entire life. His phone buzzed. Romano. Boss. We have a situation. Loris's blood went cold. Talk to me. Our surveillance picked up activity around the Jackson woman's location. Kovalenko Syndicate. 4 men. Armed. Coordinating positions. They're planning to move on her tonight. When? Best guess? Within the hour. She just left for her night shift. The twins are with the neighbor. Loris was already moving, grabbing his jacket, his gun. Pull every available asset. I want them intercepted before they get within a block of that building. Already mobilizing. But boss, there's more. Loris paused at the door. What? We traced the information leak. The Kovalenkos knew her schedule, her routine, everything. Someone gave them a complete dossier. Who? There was a brief hesitation. Diane Simpson. We have phone records. She met with Alexei Kovalenko this afternoon. Handed him a flash drive with all the intel. The world stopped. Loris had suspected Diane's manipulation. Had known she'd hidden Stephanie from him. But this was something else entirely. This was attempted murder. Where is Diane now? His voice was deadly calm. On her way to your penthouse. ETA 10 minutes. Let her come. Loris's mind was already calculating, planning, executing. Send half our people to protect Stephanie and the twins. The other half, I want at the neighbor's building. If the Kovalenkos get past us, I want a second line of defense around my children. No one gets close. Understood? Understood, boss. And Romano, when you intercept the Kovalenko team, no survivors. I want a message sent that anyone who touches my family dies screaming. With pleasure. Loris ended the call and stood in his living room, waiting. His gun rested in the holster beneath his jacket. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready. Diane had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She hadn't just manipulated him, she'd put his children's mother in mortal danger, had conspired with his enemies, had tried to erase the only woman he'd ever loved. For that, there was only one response. The elevator chimed. Diane stepped into the penthouse, elegant in a navy dress, her smile perfectly composed. Loris, I came as soon as... She stopped, saw his face, saw the cold rage in his eyes. What's wrong? She asked carefully. Sit down. Loris. Sit down. Something in his voice made her obey. She lowered herself onto the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her expression shifting from confusion to wariness. Loris walked to his desk and picked up the forensic report. He dropped it on the coffee table in front of her. Read it. Diane's eyes flicked to the document, her face paling as she recognized what it was. Loris, I can explain. You intercepted every message Stephanie sent me. Every call. Every letter. For 2 years, you made sure I never knew she was trying to reach me. That she was pregnant. That my children existed. I was protecting you, Diane said quickly, desperately. She was a distraction. You were building something important, consolidating power. You don't get to decide what I need. His voice was ice. You stole 2 years of my children's lives from me. 2 years when their mother was struggling alone because you were too selfish to let me make my own choices. I love you, Diane whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Everything I did because I love you. Love? Loris's laugh was bitter. You don't know what that word means. Because if you did, you never would have done what you did this afternoon. Diane froze. What are you talking about? Alexei Kovalenko. The restaurant downtown. The flash drive containing every detail of Stephanie's life. Handed over so they could eliminate her. The color drained completely from Diane's face. How did you... I know everything, Diane. I always do eventually. Loris leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. You didn't just betray me. You conspired to murder the mother of my children. You put my family in danger to satisfy your own jealousy. They were going to take her away from you. Diane's composure cracked, desperation flooding through. She was going to destroy everything we built together. I was trying to save us. There is no us. There never was. Loris straightened. There was only you, clinging to a man who never loved you, willing to destroy innocent lives to keep something you never actually had. Diane stood, reaching for him. Loris, please. He stepped back, his hand moving to his gun. Not drawing it, just a reminder. If anything happens to Stephanie or my children, if one hair on their heads is harmed because of what you've done, there is nowhere on this earth you'll be able to hide from me. I made a mistake, Diane sobbed. I'll fix it. I'll call them off. It's already handled. Loris pulled out his phone and made a call. Send them up. 2 of his security team entered the penthouse. Large men, expressionless, loyal. Take her, Loris said quietly. Strip her of all access, all accounts, all protection. She's no longer under my umbrella. Make sure everyone knows. Diane's eyes widened in horror. Loris, you can't without your protection. The Kovalenkos will kill me for failing. I know. The 2 words hung in the air like a death sentence. Please, Diane whispered as the men took her arms. Please, Loris. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He turned away, walking to the window, his back to her. You should have thought of that before you touched my family. Diane's sobs echoed through the penthouse as she was escorted to the elevator. The doors closed. Silence fell. Loris stood alone, staring out at the city, and made a call. Romano. Status. Kovalenko team intercepted. 4 down. Stephanie Jackson is secure and unaware. Twins are safe. No breaches. Good. Loris exhaled slowly. I'm going to her. Now? Now. Because Diane had been wrong about one thing. Loris Parisi did know what love meant, and he was done letting fear keep him from it. Stephanie finished mopping the executive office on the 15th floor, her back aching with every movement. The cleaning crew had split up an hour ago, each taking different floors of the downtown office building. She preferred working alone anyway. Less conversation meant more time to think, or not think, depending on what her exhausted mind could handle. She checked her phone. 1:47 a.m. Another hour, and she'd be done. Could head home. Catch maybe 2 hours of sleep before the twins woke up. The building was eerily quiet at night, just the hum of HVAC systems and the occasional distant sound of traffic. Stephanie gathered her supplies, preparing to move to the next floor, when she heard footsteps. Heavy, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Her heart kicked up. Security did rounds, but they knew the cleaning schedule, always announced themselves. These footsteps were different, deliberate, coordinated. Stephanie set down her mop bucket quietly and moved toward the stairwell. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe it was just... The elevator chimed. 3 men stepped out. Not security uniforms, dark clothes, harder faces, moving like predators. One of them saw her. There, he said in accented English. Stephanie ran. She burst through the stairwell door, her worn sneakers slapping against concrete as she flew down the stairs. Behind her, the door slammed open, footsteps thundering in pursuit. Her mind raced. They were here for her. Somehow, she knew it. This wasn't random. This was targeted. She hit the 10th floor landing and kept going, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. She had to get out, had to get to somewhere public, somewhere with cameras, with witnesses. A hand grabbed her arm. Stephanie screamed, twisting violently. Her elbow connected with something solid and she heard a grunt of pain. She wrenched free and stumbled forward, but there were more of them, coming up from below, cutting off her escape. She was trapped. Please, she gasped, backing against the wall. Please, I don't have anything. I don't. Shut up, one of them said, pulling out a phone. We have her. Stephanie's vision blurred with terror. She thought of Oliver and Emma, asleep at Mrs. Linda's, and the promise she made every night, I'll keep you safe. She'd failed. Whatever this was, whoever these men were, she'd failed to protect her children. The stairwell door above them exploded open. Loris Parisi appeared like something out of a nightmare, his gun drawn, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, 4 of his men spread out with military precision. Step away from her, Loris said quietly. The men holding Stephanie hesitated. One of them recognized Loris and went pale. Parisi, we didn't know. I said, step away. They released her immediately. Stephanie slumped against the wall, her legs unable to hold her weight, staring at the man she hadn't seen in over 2 years. He looked exactly the same, and completely different. The Loris she'd known had been intense but gentle with her. This man was carved from ice and violence. Romano, Loris said without taking his eyes off the Kovalenko men. Get her out of here. A large man moved forward, his hands raised non-threateningly. Miss Jackson, please come with me. You're safe now. Stephanie couldn't move, couldn't process. Loris was here. Loris had saved her. Loris, the twins, she whispered. Oliver and Emma are safe, Loris said, his voice softening just slightly. I have people protecting them. No one will touch them. You know about... I know everything. His eyes finally met hers. And I'm sorry. For all of it. But right now, I need you to go with Romano. Please, Stephanie. The sound of her name on his lips after so long broke something inside her. She nodded numbly and let Romano guide her toward the stairs. As they moved past Loris, one of the Kovalenko men shifted, his hand moving toward his jacket. Everything happened at once. Loris saw the movement and pushed Stephanie behind him. The man pulled his gun. Loris fired first, his shot echoing like thunder in the confined space, but the man had already pulled his trigger. The bullet caught Loris in the shoulder, spinning him back. He stayed on his feet, his gun still trained, and fired twice more. The man went down. Loris! Stephanie screamed. Blood bloomed across his white shirt, spreading quickly. He swayed but remained standing, his gun moving to cover the other 2 men. Don't, he said coldly. They raised their hands, terror written across their faces. Romano had his weapon drawn, his team moving to secure the threats. Boss, you're hit. I'm fine. Loris's voice was strained but controlled. Get them out of here. All of them. Clean this up. You need a hospital. I said I'm fine. Loris looked at Stephanie, his face pale but his eyes fierce. Get her to safety. That's an order. Stephanie found her voice. I'm not leaving you like this. You don't have a choice. Loris stumbled slightly, catching himself against the wall. Your children need you alive. Go. Romano didn't wait for further argument. He swept Stephanie toward the stairs, his team efficiently handling the situation behind them. She looked back once and saw Loris being supported by one of his men, blood staining his suit, his eyes never leaving her until she disappeared from view. Romano led her to an armored SUV waiting outside. The pre-dawn air was cold against her face. She was shaking, shock setting in. Where are we going? She managed. Safe house first. Then to your children. Romano's voice was professional but not unkind. Boss's orders. You and the twins are under full protection now. Will he? He'll be fine. Takes more than a bullet to stop Loris Parisi. Romano glanced at her. He's been watching over you for 3 days, ever since he found out about you and the twins, had us running surveillance, making sure you were safe. Stephanie's mind reeled. I don't understand. He left me. He never knew, Romano said quietly. About the pregnancy, about your attempts to contact him. Someone made sure he didn't know. Who? That's not my place to say. But she's been dealt with. The SUV pulled up outside Mrs. Linda's building. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Romano's phone buzzed and he answered immediately. Yes, boss. He listened, his expression unchanging. Understood. He handed the phone to Stephanie. He wants to talk to you. With trembling hands, Stephanie took the phone. Loris, are you hurt? His voice was tight with pain but focused entirely on her. No, I'm no. But you. I'll survive. I've had worse. He paused, and she heard him exhale slowly. Stephanie, I need you to listen. You and the twins are in danger because of me. Because of my world. I can protect you, but it means changing everything. Your home, your routine, your life. Or I can set you up somewhere far from here, somewhere safe, and you never have to see me again. The choice is yours." Stephanie looked up at Mrs. Linda's window, where her children slept, unaware their entire world had just shifted. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why after 2 years? Because I only found out 3 days ago that you existed. That they existed." His voice cracked slightly. "And I swear to you, if I had known, if I had received even one of your messages, I would have been there. For all of it." Tears streamed down Stephanie's face. 2 years of believing she'd been abandoned. 2 years of thinking she hadn't mattered. And he hadn't known. "I need to see you," she said. "You will. As soon as," he hissed in pain. "Loris, I'm fine. Go get our children. Keep them safe. I'll come to you as soon as I can." The line went dead. Stephanie handed the phone back to Romano, wiped her tears, and went to collect her twins. Everything had changed in one night, and somehow, impossibly, she wasn't alone anymore. The safe house was a luxury apartment in a building Stephanie could never have afforded, with panoramic windows overlooking the city and security stationed discreetly at every entrance. She sat on an overstuffed couch, Oliver and Emma playing with new toys on the carpet in front of her toys that had appeared like magic, along with clothes, food, and everything else they could possibly need. Mrs. Linda sat beside her, having insisted on coming along despite Romano's protestations. The elderly woman had taken one look at Stephanie's face and said, "Where you go, I go. Those babies need familiar faces." That had been 36 hours ago. 36 hours of waiting, of Romano providing updates that Loris was recovering, that the threat had been neutralized, that everything was being handled, but Stephanie hadn't seen him. Hadn't heard his voice since that phone call in the SUV, and the not knowing was killing her. "You should eat something," Mrs. Linda said gently, pushing a plate of food toward her. Stephanie shook her head. "I can't. You need your strength. For them." Mrs. Linda nodded toward the twins. Emma looked up at the sound of her name, her dark eyes, Loris's eyes, bright with curiosity. She was wearing a new dress, pink with small flowers, and looked happier than Stephanie had seen her in months. No financial stress hovering over them, no exhausted mother struggling to smile, just safety and comfort and toys, everything Stephanie had never been able to provide. The guilt was crushing. "Stop that," Mrs. Linda said, reading her expression. "You did everything right. You kept them alive, kept them safe, raised them with love. That's what matters. I could barely feed them. But you did. Every single day, you did." Mrs. Linda took her hand. "And now, things are different. That doesn't erase what you survived. It just means you don't have to survive alone anymore." The apartment door opened, and Romano entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Jackson, he's here." Stephanie's heart stopped. "Is he?" "See for yourself." Loris Parisi walked into the apartment, his left arm in a sling, his face pale but composed. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual suit, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Their eyes met across the room. Everything else disappeared. Romano, Mrs. Linda, even the twins for a moment. It was just Loris and Stephanie. 2 years of loss and longing compressed into a single look. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," she whispered back. Oliver chose that moment to toddle over to Loris, curious about the stranger. He grabbed onto Loris's leg with chubby hands, looking up with an expression of complete trust. Loris froze, staring down at his son like he was seeing a miracle. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to sit on the floor, ignoring the obvious pain the movement caused. Oliver immediately climbed into his lap, patting Loris's face with sticky hands. Emma, not wanting to be left out, abandoned her toys and crawled over, settling against Loris's good side. And Loris Parisi, the most feared man in the city, sat on the floor of a safe house with his children in his arms and cried. Not dramatic sobs, just silent tears streaming down his face as he held Oliver and Emma, his expression raw with emotion he'd kept buried for years. Stephanie's own tears fell as she watched. Mrs. Linda squeezed her hand and stood quietly, gesturing for Romano to follow her out. "We'll give you privacy," she murmured. The door closed softly behind them. Stephanie moved from the couch to the floor, sitting across from Loris. The twins, content with their new playmate, had already lost interest and returned to their toys, leaving the adults to their reunion. "They're beautiful," Loris said, his voice hoarse. "They look like—" "You," Stephanie finished. "Everyone says they look like you. I'm sorry." The words came out broken. "God, Stephanie, I'm so sorry. For leaving, for not knowing, for every moment you had to face alone." "You didn't know," she said softly. You said someone kept it from you. Loris's jaw tightened. Diane. My assistant, then my... He couldn't finish the sentence. She intercepted everything. Every message, every call. I never knew you were trying to reach me. Why would she do that? Because she wanted me for herself. And she knew you were the only person who could make me choose something other than power. He looked at her directly. She was right. Stephanie's breath caught. Loris, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I left you, even if I didn't know about the twins. I convinced myself walking away was protecting you from my world. I was wrong, and you paid the price for my cowardice. You saved my life last night. After putting it in danger in the first place, the Kovalenkos came after you because of me, because Diane gave them the information to use you against me. Stephanie processed this, the enormity of it settling over her. What happened to her? She's no longer under my protection. In my world, that's a death sentence. His expression hardened. She made her choice when she tried to have you killed, and the men who came after me, dead. All of them. The Kovalenkos have been sent a message my family is untouchable. His family. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. I don't know how to do this, Stephanie admitted. I don't know your world, Loris. I don't know how to be... She gestured helplessly around the apartment. This. I was barely surviving as a waitress. Now I'm in a luxury apartment with armed guards and... I know. He shifted carefully, his shoulder clearly causing him pain. And I'm not asking you to dive into my world completely. I'm asking if I can be part of yours. Part of theirs. He nodded toward the twins. I've missed 2 years. I can't get those back. But maybe I don't have to miss anything else. Just like that? You think you can just show up and be their father? No, Loris said honestly. I think it'll take time. I think I'll make mistakes. I think they'll have to learn to trust me just like you do. But I'm willing to do the work, whatever it takes. Stephanie studied him, this man she'd loved, who'd broken her heart, who'd saved her life, who'd given her the 2 most precious things in her world. He looked exhausted, wounded, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him before. I can't just forgive you instantly, she said. I can't pretend the last 2 years didn't happen. I'm not asking you to, and I won't let you sweep in and take over. They're my children. Our children, he interrupted gently. And you've been their everything. I know that. I respect that. I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to support you. Emma chose that moment to crawl back over, pulling herself up using Loris's good arm. She babbled something incomprehensible and offered him a toy, a small stuffed bear. Loris took it with such reverence. You'd think she'd handed him something priceless. Thank you, Emma. At the sound of her name from his lips, Emma smiled a bright, toothy grin that transformed her face, and Stephanie felt something inside her chest crack open. This was real. Loris was here, holding their daughter's toy like it was treasure, looking at their children like they were his entire world. Okay, she whispered. Loris's eyes snapped to hers. Okay, you can try. You can be part of their lives, part of our lives, but slowly, on my terms. And if you hurt them, I won't, he said fiercely. I swear to you, Stephanie, I will spend the rest of my life making up for the time I lost, for the pain I caused, for everything. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They sat there on the floor, their children playing between them, and for the first time in 2 years, Stephanie felt something she'd almost forgotten, hope. Morning light filtered through the windows of a house Stephanie never imagined. She'd live in a renovated brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from downtown to feel safe but close enough to everything the twins might need. A real home, with a backyard where Oliver and Emma could play, with bedrooms and space and security that didn't announce itself but was always present. Stephanie stood at the kitchen counter, making breakfast, still adjusting to the reality that she didn't have to work today, or tomorrow, or ever again, if she chose not to. Loris had set up accounts, established trust funds for the twins, ensured she'd never have to worry about money again. But she'd kept her job at the diner, part-time now, just enough to maintain her sense of independence, her connection to the life she'd built alone. Loris had understood without her having to explain. That was new being understood. The back door opened, and Loris came inside, carrying Emma on his good side while Oliver toddled behind him, both children covered in dirt from the garden. His arm was out of the sling now, though she knew he still felt the injury. We planted tomatoes, he announced, setting Emma down carefully. Or attempted to. Mostly we just made a mess. Emma ran to Stephanie, her hands muddy, chattering excitedly in the language only 2-year-olds understood. Stephanie scooped her up despite the dirt, kissing her forehead. Bath time for both of you. she said. I'll handle it, Loris offered. Stephanie hesitated, then nodded. This was still hard, sharing the responsibility she'd carried alone for so long, trusting someone else with her children's care. But Loris had been patient, had proven himself day after day, showing up even when it was difficult, learning their routines, their preferences, their little personalities. He'd been there for Emma's fever last week, staying up all night while Stephanie slept, monitoring her temperature and calling the doctor without being asked. He'd been there when Oliver had a nightmare, letting the toddler fall asleep on his chest while he worked through documents one-handed. He'd been there for the ordinary moments too, breakfast, playtime, bedtime stories read in his deep voice that made both twins settle immediately. He was becoming their father. Not all at once, but piece by piece, day by day, and Stephanie was learning to let him. She heard splashing and laughter from upstairs. Bath time was apparently going well. She finished setting the table, then walked to the living room, where photographs she'd printed sat in new frames. Pictures of the twins as newborns that Loris had never seen. Their first smiles, first steps, every milestone he'd missed. He'd looked through them all with quiet devastation, memorizing faces and moments he could never get back. But he was here for the new moments. That had to count for something. Her phone buzzed. Mrs. Linda, checking in as she did every few days. How are my babies? Stephanie smiled and typed back. Happy. Covered in dirt. Exactly as babies should be. And their father? Stephanie paused, considering her answer. Then, he's trying, really trying. And their mother? Another pause. Learning to trust again. Good. You all deserve happiness. Upstairs, she heard Loris's deep voice singing something off-key, followed by the twins' delighted laughter. The sound pulled at something deep in her chest. Romano appeared in the doorway. He was always somewhere nearby, part of the security detail that now surrounded their lives. Miss Jackson, someone's here to see you. Stephanie frowned. Who? Says her name is Patricia Morrison. Claims she worked with you at the gallery. The name hit Stephanie like a shock. Patricia had been her manager before everything fell apart, before Loris, before the twins. They'd lost touch completely. Show her in, Stephanie said hesitantly. Patricia appeared moments later, older than Stephanie remembered but smiling warmly. I've been trying to find you for months. You completely disappeared. I had my reasons. I can imagine. Patricia looked around the beautiful home, clearly putting pieces together. I heard you had twins. Congratulations. Thank you. I'm actually here with an offer. The gallery is reopening under new management. We're looking for a curator for the contemporary collection. I immediately thought of you. Patricia pulled out a card. I know it's been a while, but you had a real eye, Stephanie. A real passion. I'd hate to see that go to waste. Stephanie took the card, her heart hammering. Art. Her dream. The one she'd buried under survival and exhaustion and single motherhood. The thing she'd loved before everything became about just getting through each day. I have children now, she said carefully. I can't. The position is flexible, part-time if needed. We're not looking for someone to work 60-hour weeks. We're looking for someone who loves art and can help others love it too. Patricia smiled. Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands. After Patricia left, Stephanie stood holding the business card, feeling the weight of possibility. Loris came downstairs carrying a clean, pajama-clad Emma, while Oliver trailed behind in matching dinosaur pajamas. Who was that? Someone from my old life, Stephanie said softly, offering me a piece of my dream back. He set Emma down and moved closer. Tell me. She did about the gallery, the curator position, her love of art that she'd set aside because survival took precedence over dreams. You should do it, Loris said immediately. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You have support now. Mrs. Linda adores the twins. I'm here. Romano and his team can handle security during gallery hours. You don't have to choose between being a mother and being yourself anymore. Stephanie's eyes stung. You make it sound easy. It won't be easy, but it's possible now. That's the difference. He cupped her face gently. I can't give you back the years you lost, but I can make sure you don't lose anything else because of circumstances. You deserve your dreams, Stephanie. Let me help you reach them. She leaned into his touch. This man who'd broken her heart and was now painstakingly putting it back together, piece by piece. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll call her tomorrow. Loris smiled, the real smile she'd fallen in love with years ago, the one that made his whole face transform. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, carefully, asking nothing more than she was ready to give. Oliver tugged on Stephanie's leg. "Mama, hungry." The moment broke, returning them to the beautiful ordinary of family life. They ate dinner together, the twins making messes and Loris pretending to steal food from their plates, making them shriek with laughter. After dinner, Stephanie bathed the twins again. Somehow they'd gotten food everywhere while Loris cleaned the kitchen. Domestic, normal, a life she'd never thought possible. When the twins were finally asleep in their shared room, Stephanie found Loris in what had become his study, working through documents. He looked up as she entered. "They're out?" he asked. "Finally." Emma fought it, but Oliver dragged her down with him. Loris smiled and closed his laptop. "Come here." She crossed the room and he pulled her down onto the couch beside him, his good arm around her shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence, no pressure, just presence. "Thank you," Stephanie said softly. "For what? For staying, for showing up every day, for not giving up when I made it difficult. You had every right to make it difficult." His thumb traced circles on her shoulder. "I meant what I said, Stephanie. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." She turned to look at him, this complicated, dangerous, gentle man. "I'm starting to believe that. Good." He kissed her temple. "Because I'm going to keep proving it until you have no doubts left." They sat there as darkness fell outside, the house quiet except for the distant sound of the twins breathing through the baby monitor. Loris Parisi had built his life on power and control and emotional distance. But sitting here with Stephanie in his arms, his children sleeping down the hall, he understood what real power felt like. Not the ability to destroy, the privilege to protect, not the capacity for violence, the courage to love. When Loris had seen Stephanie crossing that street in the rain, something inside him had shattered and reformed. The walls he'd built, the distance he'd maintained, the conviction that emotions were weaknesses, all of it had crumbled in the face of 2 crying babies and a woman he'd never stopped loving. He'd failed them once by leaving. He'd almost failed them again by not knowing they existed. But now he showed up every morning to make breakfast. He learned the difference between Oliver's hungry cry and his tired cry. He memorized Emma's favorite stuffed animal and Oliver's preferred bedtime story. He supported Stephanie's dreams while building new dreams of his own, not empires of fear, but a family built on trust. It wasn't perfect. There were hard conversations ahead, about his world and the dangers that came with it, about the past and the future and everything in between. But they were facing it together now, and that made all the difference. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Deals were made, territories shifted, power changed hands. Loris's empire still existed, still operated, but he'd learned to separate that world from this one. This one, the house with toys scattered across the floor and children's laughter echoing through the halls, and a woman who'd survived everything he'd unknowingly put her through. This was what mattered. This was what he'd protect with everything he had. Because when Loris Parisi finally saw his past crossing the street in the rain, crying babies in her arms and exhaustion in her eyes, he didn't look away again. He never would. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen, and before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there. Morning light filtered through the windows of a house Stephanie never imagined. She'd live in a renovated brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from downtown to feel safe but close enough to everything the twins might need. A real home, with a backyard where Oliver and Emma could play, with bedrooms and space and security that didn't announce itself but was always present. Stephanie stood at the kitchen counter, making breakfast, still adjusting to the reality that she didn't have to work today, or tomorrow, or ever again, if she chose not to. Loris had set up accounts, established trust funds for the twins, ensured she'd never have to worry about money again. But she'd kept her job at the diner. Part-time now, just enough to maintain her sense of independence, her connection to the life she'd built alone. Loris had understood without her having to explain. That was new, being understood. The back door opened and Loris came inside, carrying Emma on his good side while Oliver toddled behind him, both children covered in dirt from the garden. His arm was out of the sling now, though she knew he still felt the injury. "We planted tomatoes," he announced, setting Emma down carefully. "Or attempted to. Mostly we just made a mess." Emma ran to Stephanie, her hands muddy, chattering excitedly in the language only 2-year-olds understood. Stephanie scooped her up despite the dirt, kissing her forehead. "Bath time for both of you," she said. "I'll handle it," Loris offered. Stephanie hesitated, then nodded. This was still hard, sharing the responsibility she'd carried alone for so long, trusting someone else with her children's care. But Loris had been patient, had proven himself day after day, showing up even when it was difficult, learning their routines, their preferences, their little personalities. He'd been there for Emma's fever last week, staying up all night while Stephanie slept, monitoring her temperature and calling the doctor without being asked. He'd been there when Oliver had a nightmare, letting the toddler fall asleep on his chest while he worked through documents one-handed. He'd been there for the ordinary moments, too. Breakfast, playtime, bedtime, stories read in his deep voice that made both twins settle immediately. He was becoming their father. Not all at once, but piece by piece, day by day, and Stephanie was learning to let him. She heard splashing and laughter from upstairs. Bath time was apparently going well. She finished setting the table, then walked to the living room, where photographs she'd printed sat in new frames. Pictures of the twins as newborns that Loris had never seen. Their first smiles, first steps, every milestone he'd missed. He'd looked through them all with quiet devastation, memorizing faces and moments he could never get back, but he was here for the new moments. That had to count for something. Her phone buzzed. Mrs. Linda, checking in as she did every few days. "How are my babies?" Stephanie smiled and typed back, "Happy, covered in dirt. Exactly as babies should be. And their father?" Stephanie paused, considering her answer. Then, "He's trying. Really trying. And their mother?" Another pause, learning to trust again. "Good. You all deserve happiness." Upstairs, she heard Loris's deep voice singing something off-key, followed by the twins' delighted laughter. The sound pulled at something deep in her chest. Romano appeared in the doorway. He was always somewhere nearby, part of the security detail that now surrounded their lives. "Miss Jackson, someone's here to see you." Stephanie frowned. "Who?" "Says her name is Patricia Morrison. Claims she worked with you at the gallery." The name hit Stephanie like a shock. Patricia had been her manager before everything fell apart, before Loris, before the twins. They'd lost touch completely. "Show her in," Stephanie said hesitantly. Patricia appeared moments later, older than Stephanie remembered but smiling warmly. "I've been trying to find you for months. You completely disappeared. I had my reasons." "I can imagine." Patricia looked around the beautiful home, clearly putting pieces together. "I heard you had twins. Congratulations." "Thank you. I'm actually here with an offer. The gallery is reopening under new management. We're looking for a curator for the contemporary collection." I immediately thought of you. Patricia pulled out a card. "I know it's been a while, but you had a real eye, Stephanie. A real passion. I'd hate to see that go to waste." Stephanie took the card, her heart hammering. Art. Her dream. The one she'd buried under survival and exhaustion and single motherhood. The thing she'd loved before everything became about just getting through each day. "I have children now," she said carefully. "I can't. The position is flexible, part-time if needed. We're not looking for someone to work 60-hour weeks. We're looking for someone who loves art and can help others love it too." Patricia smiled. "Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands." After Patricia left, Stephanie stood holding the business card, feeling the weight of possibility. Loris came downstairs carrying a clean, pajama-clad Emma, while Oliver trailed behind in matching dinosaur pajamas. "Who was that?" "Someone from my old life," Stephanie said softly, "offering me a piece of my dream back." He set Emma down and moved closer. "Tell me." She did about the gallery, the curator position, her love of art that she'd set aside because survival took precedence over dreams. "You should do it," Loris said immediately. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple. You have support now. Mrs. Linda adores the twins. I'm here. Romano and his team can handle security during gallery hours. You don't have to choose between being a mother and being yourself anymore." Stephanie's eyes stung. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be easy, but it's possible now. That's the difference." He cupped her face gently. "I can't give you back the years you lost, but I can make sure you don't lose anything else because of circumstances. You deserve your dreams, Stephanie. Let me help you reach them." She leaned into his touch, this man who'd broken her heart and was now painstakingly putting it back together, piece by piece. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll call her tomorrow." Loris smiled, the real smile she'd fallen in love with years ago, the one that made his whole face transform. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, carefully, asking nothing more than she was ready to give. Oliver tugged on Stephanie's leg. "Mama hungry?" The moment broke, returning them to the beautiful ordinary of family life. They ate dinner together, the twins making messes and Loris pretending to steal food from their plates, making them shriek with laughter. After dinner, Stephanie bathed the twins again. Somehow they'd gotten food everywhere while Loris cleaned the kitchen. Domestic. Normal. A life she'd never thought possible. When the twins were finally asleep in their shared room, Stephanie found Loris in what had become his study, working through documents. He looked up as she entered. "They're out?" he asked. Finally, Emma fought it, but Oliver dragged her down with him. Loris smiled and closed his laptop. "Come here." She crossed the room and he pulled her down onto the couch beside him, his good arm around her shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence. No pressure, just presence. "Thank you," Stephanie said softly. "For what?" "For staying. For showing up every day. For not giving up when I made it difficult. You had every right to make it difficult." His thumb traced circles on her shoulder. "I meant what I said, Stephanie. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." She turned to look at him, this complicated, dangerous, gentle man. "I'm starting to believe that. Good." He kissed her temple. "Because I'm going to keep proving it until you have no doubts left." They sat there as darkness fell outside, the house quiet except for the distant sound of the twins breathing through the baby monitor. Loris Parisi had built his life on power and control and emotional distance, but sitting here with Stephanie in his arms, his children sleeping down the hall, he understood what real power felt like. Not the ability to destroy, the privilege to protect, not the capacity for violence, the courage to love. When Loris had seen Stephanie crossing that street in the rain, something inside him had shattered and reformed. The walls he'd built, the distance he'd maintained, the conviction that emotions were weaknesses, all of it had crumbled in the face of 2 crying babies and a woman he'd never stopped loving. He'd failed them once by leaving. He'd almost failed them again by not knowing they existed. But now? Now he showed up every morning to make breakfast. He learned the difference between Oliver's hungry cry and his tired cry. He memorized Emma's favorite stuffed animal and Oliver's preferred bedtime story. He supported Stephanie's dreams while building new dreams of his own, not empires of fear, but a family built on trust. It wasn't perfect. There were hard conversations ahead, about his world and the dangers that came with it, about the past and the future and everything in between. But they were facing it together now, and that made all the difference. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Deals were made, territories shifted, power changed hands. Loris's empire still existed, still operated, but he'd learned to separate that world from this one. This one, the house with toys scattered across the floor and children's laughter echoing through the halls, and a woman who'd survived everything he'd unknowingly put her through. This was what mattered. This was what he'd protect with everything he had. Because when Loris Parisi finally saw his past crossing the street in the rain, crying babies in her arms and exhaustion in her eyes, he didn't look away again. He never would. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.